Thank you for standing by. I would like to inform all participants that your lines have been placed on a listen-only mode until the question-and-answer session of today's call. Today's call is being recorded. If anyone has any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to J.R. Wazinski. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you, Amanda, and welcome everybody to our Wage and Hour breakout session for today's Advancing Compliance Solutions for today's Workplace Summit. Welcome, and thanks for everybody for jumping on. We're already going over 200 people here, so we're excited to have a good volume of folks ready to talk about our compliance assistance materials. So thanks again for coming. So I'll kind of run through some logistics stuff, and then we'll jump in. So hopefully those of you coming on have seen one or both of our earlier panels this morning. They were really good panels. They were on DOL.gov/summit. It was a really great platform to check it out. So we covered a bunch of topics there, and this one will really dive into a lot of our Wage and Hour specifics. Just a little bit of background about myself. Again, my name is J.R. Wazinski. I'm the Communications Director for Wage and Hour. I've been with Wage and Hour about almost 4 months now. I've been in labor for about 5 years and in government for like 23 years. So I'm kind of excited to hear from you all about what the good and bad you see in our Wage and Hour products, because that's something I'm hoping to help address as sort of a newbie coming over to Wage and Hour. And to help me, since I'm sort of newer to all this, we've got a number of staff on in our sort of speaker room here who will also be responding to the WebEx chat, and that's Michael Kravitz, Ambreen Tariq, Dan Weeks, Juan Rodriguez, Lori Manjicaro, and Wendy Johnson, who are all online and will be helping answer questions on the chat, and then also potentially answering questions on the audio side here. And like the operator said, we've got about a dozen slides we're going to run through fairly quickly because we really want to hear from you all. That's the whole point of this breakout session, is really a listening session to hear from you all about the things you're finding that are helpful, the things you're finding that aren't as helpful, frankly. So that's really what we want to get to. So as I said, we'll take questions and comments over the phone in audio as well as through the chat. You can email or put in the chat as soon as you feel a question bubble up, or you're certainly welcome to, once we open it up, hit *1, and then you'll get enabled by the operator to ask a question live, and we'll answer it that way. So you're welcome to do either of those. And if we don't get a lot of audio ones, we'll probably answer some of the chat ones on through our speakers as well. Hopefully, if you registered early, you got this earlier on maybe 11 this morning, you got a PDF of these slides. So these are, emailed them out, so you're welcome to follow along. If you're not on the WebEx, you can just follow along through the PDF I sent out as well. And again, this is being recorded, so just keep that in mind. We're going to hopefully post this up afterwards for other folks who couldn't make it today. So, so those are kind of the logistics. Again, welcome. We've got, looks like, over 250 folks now, and more coming, hopefully. So we'll hop right in. And so hopefully you're seeing the slides up on your screen. And really today our goal is to solicit stakeholder feedback. It's truly to hear from you all. We want to get it on our whole wide range of compliance assistance materials. And really we're focusing on what we're calling modern compliance assistance tools. And you may have heard Michael Kravitz in the second panel talk about some of these modern tools. So things like our animated videos, our web tools, our social media, any of our sort of digital products, all those kinds of things, we're hoping to hear from you all about what's working and what's not working. We also obviously have a lot of materials up in response to the COVID pandemic. So we've got questions and answers, web tools, outreach materials like public service announcements, webinars, posters, pop-up banners, you name it. They're either out in the field or up on our website. So we're hoping you've seen some of those and have some feedback and would love to hear more. And then also we'll talk about our in-language materials, all across the board, not just our pandemic stuff, but in-language materials, and specifically, what languages, we might need more materials in. Obviously, Spanish is a big one, and we do a lot of our materials in Spanish and are trying to focus on doing as many more as we can. But any other sort of other languages that you feel need, and would also like to hear why you think they need attention. If there's a specific industry or, a certain area of the country or whatever, would love to hear the details on that. So that's what we're hoping to hear. So I'll bring the slide up again at the end, this focus feedback slide here. So these are just a number of bulleted questions that we hope to help focus feedback. Because I know I've got 3 kids, and if you ask them how their day went, they say good, and that's it. So we're hoping to, draw a little more out. So as we get to the end, I'll pull this back up, and we can hopefully use these sorts of really kind of pointed questions to help really drill down into what we want to hear from you all. And again, that's what do you find most helpful? What new ideas do you have? What features within certain materials are most helpful? If they weren't helpful, why? Is it a language issue, a technical issue, the actual content itself? What channels should we use? What's really reaching workers and employers where they're already getting their information? How can we best share our materials? Again, is it, traditional means? Is it through more digital means? Is it social media? Is it through stakeholder, third-party groups? And how can we make them more user-friendly and user-focused? We talk a lot about human-centered design, and again, if you saw the panels, you probably heard Michael Kratos talk about human-centered design. We really try to keep that in mind. It's a little cliche and kind of jargony, but we like to keep that in mind when we're creating materials that, hey, it's got to be readable. It's got to be in plain language. It's got to be easily digestible. So all those sorts of questions are what we really want to hear from you all. So please keep those in mind as we run through some examples and then as you kind of give some feedback towards the end. So we'll jump right in here. So on the screen here, and I'm on, it's the subscriber email update slide. So at the bottom of our DOL.gov, on every page of DOL.gov, we have a big footer. And in that footer, and sort of in the middle of it, you'll see subscribe to the DOL newsletter in that sort of, the third column over. And that's a great, calling it a modernized tool is one way of labeling it. Basically, it's just a way to subscribe and get an email digest of all the information. And there are literally dozens of things you can subscribe to. But we wanted to point that out as a good tool that we use quite a bit when we promote the various news coming out, new tools, just any little tidbits that, we feel are newsworthy, we send out to folks on these lists. And we have, I think it's over 140,000 subscribers to some of these lists. So there's a lot of folks on these lists. And, when we have stuff newsworthy, we send it out to them. There's the 5 ones there on that second part of the slide. So you'll see our, various administrator materials, our field assistance bulletins, our FABs, as we call them, key news, and then a couple other smaller ones, our Section 14C, and then our prevailing wage seminar announcements. But really, if you have any interest in wage and hour information, we encourage you to go there and subscribe to that to really, keep up to date every day on what's hot and what's coming out from wage and hour. Another product we're pretty proud of, it's some more recent thing here, is our Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, compliance videos. And again, getting back to that kind of human-centered idea, we've heard from folks for a while now that, hey, I go to YouTube and I search how to fix the brakes on my car. I want to go to YouTube and figure out a little video that shows me what I need to do under FLSA. And so we kind of took that to heart, went back and came out with these animated videos using stakeholder feedback that really kind of try to simplify and give a little manageable look at the various topics under FLSA: coverage, minimum wage, deductions, hours worked, overtime. We've got a lot of good feedback on them, but we're always curious to hear more. And if there are other topics, and not just our FLSA videos, but other videos that we have up, or you feel like we need more, video snippets on to help with any number of topics that we cover through Wage and Hour. So that's one of the ones we're pretty proud of here recently. Our DOL timesheet app is up, available on the App Store for Apple, for iPhone. That was first released way back in 2011, believe it or not. And then we kind of had a renewed release about a year ago. And since then, it's been downloaded, it's like 3,500 times. So it's, it's getting a little bit of play out there. And really, this is to help, again, give folks an option of a modern tool to help with that record-keeping part of our mandate. This is a way that employers can use it as a way to keep records. Employees can use it as their own way to keep track of their time. So it's just one more tool we wanted to put out that gave folks an option of where to help keep that time to help satisfy timekeeping recording requirements. So that's been out for a while. Next up, and hopefully some of you are familiar with our social media Twitter handle, which is at WHD_DOL. That's been up for about 4 years now. We've got super robust. We're not really the Kardashians, but we have 3,000 followers. And you'll see that in the number of posts we put up on our reach and our impressions. And this is one tool that, I'm excited about helping to really kind of ramp up, like I said, since I've gotten in. It's a lot of more text-based messages, and we're really hoping to kind of really dive into that and do more with visuals and other materials. For example, I guess it was right around March, April, we had a national online dialogue that dealt with some of the response to the pandemic, and we had a Twitter chat to help promote that national online dialogue. So that's an example of something we've used our social media to help amplify efforts going on within the department. So would love to hear more ideas about creative ways to use our social media. And please keep in mind, we are the government. We can't do, flash mobs and that kind of crazy stuff. But we would love to hear your ideas about how to better use our social media and better engage folks. So please keep that in mind as well. So here's another kind of product that we got some input in from stakeholders to help improve, which is our Family and Medical Leave Act guides. We have an employer guide and an employee guide, and those have been around for years and years. And so we recently had an effort to kind of update them and really kind of get them into a nice format. And you'll see, like on the right there, you've got some flow charts to help folks navigate through the information. And it's pretty dense stuff. There's a lot of stuff in there, but our hope was to pull in stakeholder feedback when we revise those guides. And again, we're always open to hearing more about how to further improve those materials. So if you've used those guides, we want to hear, were they useful? What's missing? What do we need to have in there? What were really good parts of it? So we wanted to point that out as well. Along those lines, we have a number of compliance assistance toolkits up on our website. There's 9 of them up there right now. They have these little icons with the various topics that we cover. But this is another tool in our toolbox to help folks comply with the laws and regulations. And a lot of these contain some of our fact sheets, some of our various web tools that are available for these topics. So I highly encourage you to kind of dive into there and check those out and tell us, again, what we can improve on, what's missing that you think should be in there, or what else is helpful that we could help improve. And with all of these materials, you'll see the little website down at the bottom of the slide where you can click in directly and go directly to the website that contains all these materials. So you're welcome to click in and dig around a little more. So those were some of the more kind of standard materials. And obviously in the last 6 months, we've had to respond to the COVID pandemic. And so as I mentioned kind of at the top of the slideshow, we've got a lot of materials up online that respond to the pandemic. And the big thing in our world is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, or FCRA. And so we've got a ton of materials up there that talks about FCRA and the paid leave that employees can use under FCRA, including an online eligibility tool. And Michael Kravis talked about that in the panel. We have this tool that's kind of like what did Ali Kilmartin, she said, choose your own adventure. You kind of click the different buttons to help tell you as an employee if you're eligible for the FCRA leave. And, it's not a cure-all. It doesn't answer every scenario, but we put it together to help answer the most common scenarios and lead you to sort of the responses that help give you a yay or nay on if you're eligible. But at the end of the day, you can always call that number at the bottom of the slide, 866-4-US-WAGE, that you can talk to folks who stand by in a number of languages and can help walk you through specific scenarios and talk about eligibility. So beyond the tool and the phone number, we've got fact sheets, PSAs. We've got, literally like 130 or 40 some questions and answers, posters, field assistance bulletins. So there's a ton of material up there to help answer questions. And again, the public service announcements, we're also happy to have those out. That's part of the campaign. We've got radio and video PSAs that are out right now, and hopefully some of you folks have heard them. I actually heard one myself. I live in Burke, Virginia, outside of D.C., and I actually heard one driving my son to an early morning baseball game on Sunday, and I was thrilled to actually hear it over the radio. I think my son was quite bored with it, but he's not really the target audience. So anyway, we're thrilled that those are out, and they're getting a lot of good play. So far, they've got over 24 million impressions across the country with those PSAs. So again, an example of a tool that we're happy to be using and really can touch folks where they're already consuming their information. So here's that web tool I was talking about. It runs through, there's kind of 4 screens crammed onto this one slide here, but you start top left. It says, are you an employee? Yes. Where do you work? What size business? What kind of leave do you need? Or what is your sort of criteria for determining if you want to use that leave? And eventually it spits you out to the end where you can get an answer to your scenario. And again, it doesn't answer all the scenarios. And on all those, at the bottom of all those pages, we have our 800 number, our 866 number that helps. If you can't get an answer there, you can always call in and get an answer that way. And finally, our in-language materials. Again, we've got 19 different materials that are up on the website, in different fact sheets and posters and stuff like that in a number of these various languages. We've got a whole Spanish language web hub at that address there, which has, dozens of pages of material in Spanish. And then if you call our 866 number, we can get somebody on the line in over 200 different languages to help walk folks through the materials. So, we certainly don't pretend to cover all languages and with all our materials, but we want to hear from you all about what are those materials we should be targeting in which industries and maybe in which areas, that sort of thing. So please keep that in mind as we move on to the comments and questions. So again, here's that slide from the beginning with all the pointed questions we want to ask folks about and try to get really, a little bit of a deeper dive into some of these questions. So that works us through the slideshow. Again, we wanted to keep that brief. There's a ton of other materials we could have highlighted, but we want to just give you a kind of a quick sample of some various stuff out there. So at this point, we've got over 300 folks logged into the WebEx that I can see. I will open it up to our operator to see if we have any questions queued up.
Thank you. As a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please press star 1. One moment. At this time, we have no questions on the audio line, but again, as a reminder, please press star 1 if you'd like to ask a question.
Okay, well, while we're waiting for that, we've had a couple of questions come in over the chat, and one of them was about, and we get this quite a bit, questions about there are private sector materials, do you have any public agency materials? We also get this question about employer versus employee materials. So, we've got a very large audience, and we try to put up a little bit of something for everybody, but sometimes, when you're trying to hit everybody, you don't necessarily do. But yes, we do have materials. In fact, one of the criteria for talking about the FCRA leave is whether somebody's employed through a private employer or a public employer, because there are some differences, potential differences in how leave can be applied. So there are some materials that do vary based on private versus public. That's a good, I'm glad you raised that in the chat, because that's an interesting distinction about how our users might want to consume the information, where it might be easier to sort of designate this is more of a private sector kind of content versus, public sector. That's an interesting point to bring up as something to potentially put more materials with a focus on one or the other. So thanks for pointing out that. We had another question about our FMLA forms, and this was an interesting one because we just put up some new forms. And so, yeah, so those just went up. I think it's been maybe a month now. And the hope was there was some content that was updated in those forms. We added some sections on like filling it out with enabling a signature on the forms. Those are optional forms, but they are certainly used a lot out in the industry. So those were put up because there were some slight changes and then some actually little sort of technical improvements to be able to do things like sign them digitally. So those were put up. Operator, do we have any audio questions?
Thank you. We do. Our first question comes from Rebecca English. Your line is open.
Thank you. So I worked in healthcare for about 11 and a half years, and I've been in HR and FMLA administration for nearly 10. So I have insights into filling out the forms, completing the forms on the clinical side, but then now seeing the challenges with getting a completed certification from the HR perspective and from the employee perspective. So I'm wondering if there's any kind of compliance tools that can be done, compliance videos, or some type of an online feature that healthcare providers could access to learn how to fill out the forms so we can get it right maybe the first time more often.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Obviously, with the pandemic, there's been a very large focus on our folks on the front line, all those healthcare workers and all the things they have to go through. So that's something we've been hearing in multiple forms is the various ways to help the healthcare folks in not just the folks actually responding to patients, but the folks crunching all the behind the scenes and the paperwork and all that. So that is something that has come up quite a bit. And that's something that we could potentially do some things like videos on or other, more pointed communications on. Were there specific like parts of some of the regs that you were most interested in, or do you have anything more sort of detailed on that?
I think that the healthcare providers get confused as far as putting somebody off from work completely and saying that they're unable to perform their job duties. So helping them understand that it's not necessarily a fitness for duty issue, but it's an issue regarding the nature of the leave and how that leave ties in with their inability to perform one or more of their job duties. So I think that that's a missing link. And then also explaining more. I mean, obviously, continuous leave is simpler, but intermittent and reduced schedule leave can create confusion as well. So healthcare providers, a lot of times the certifications are incomplete and insufficient because they aren't specifying how their medical condition or need for leave ties into their inability to do their job. So yeah. I had a situation recently where an employee was put out on COVID-related leave and couldn't have surgery until the pandemic issues had cleared, allowing the employee to take leave for surgery. Well, that surgeon could not certify the employee's need for continuous leave because they hadn't performed the surgery. So, but in the meantime, the employee's been out continuously. So, and then the doctor just wrote to be determined, about what job duty, how long they needed to be off from work. Everything was to be determined under the continuous leave because the surgeon couldn't certify the need for leave since surgery hadn't been performed.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out because we have been getting questions on, and the topic you're touching on right there, the continuous versus intermittent is something we're hearing about quite a bit. In fact, we just put out some guidance in terms of how the intermittent leave affected like school and school closures and or like hybrid situations where schools were open one day but technically closed the next because they were virtual. So there is quite a lot of that the whole thing versus continuous versus intermittent is definitely an issue that's on our radar.
Okay.
So we'll definitely take that back. Again, with the specific scenarios, it's tough. Again, I would encourage if folks have a very specific situation, they could certainly call in and get more specific guidance on that. Because, yeah, that's something we're hearing about quite a bit. But we're certainly, continually kind of have an ear to the ground to try to find trends like that we can help produce, like, good questions and answers on that. So thanks for bringing that up.
Sure, thank you.
And sort of along those lines, and let me just, one of the chat came in and, it asked about how Wage and Hour is working with state and local wage and hour agencies. I meant to point this out in my sort of opener. So hopefully a lot of you are familiar. We have a whole cadre of folks in the field called our CORE, our Community Outreach Resource and Planning Specialists. And there's 54 of these folks all across the nation in our district offices. And their main job is outreach and working with local groups and stakeholders and agencies to help, amplify our message, get the word out about, the different programs we have. So they're all over the country. They're up on our website. If you go into the Contact Us part of our website at dol.gov/WHD, you can basically find your local CORE, and these folks are true professionals at, connecting up. They can do trainings. They can, they do virtual trainings now, obviously with the pandemic. But before that, they could visit a business and do a training or a little seminar on the different services and content we have. So I certainly can't recommend them enough as a great resource for additional compliance assistance type trainings and materials. Operator, any other questions on the audio side?
Thank you. We do. Our next question comes from Lisa. Your line is open.
Hello. I have this question that just came up today, and I knew I was having this call, so great timing. I have an employee who approached us who wants to take leave. Unfortunately, her grandchildren were just placed in her custody last Friday through DCHF, and she has temporary custody, and she said she is going to apply for full custody of her grandchildren. Under the locus parentis under FMLA, does that qualify for that? Because it just didn't have enough information for me to interpret this.
Yeah, again, that's one of those, we're hearing scenarios like that, more and more. Again, it's tough without knowing more details to give a good answer on that. Again, I would encourage her to call into that 866 number, and she can walk through the specifics of that scenario. Because there's a lot of sort of if-thens that factor into how, and as the prior caller talked about, the timelines sometimes make a difference too. So, so I would encourage her to call in. It's tough to give a good answer with those really, really specific scenarios.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Dina. Your line is open.
Hi. I put it in the chat, but I was afraid that it might not get answered, so that's why I called in. I have just started an apprenticeship program with our 25 stores, and I am struggling to find tools and resources to help me monitor and track all of the compliance that goes with that. Where would I go to reach out and find that information on your site?
So again, I would encourage you to, I can't remember if you said where you were in the country, but certainly connect up with your local CORE, that outreach person, and they can certainly help. They could even do like a little training or something, but they'd be happy to walk through. And again, even with something like that, you can call our 866 number, and they can just sit there on the phone with you and walk you through what specific, industry or forms or other things like that could help with your group.
Okay. All right.
And I have that. Yeah. Again, under the contact us area on our webpage, you can get to that listing of all 54 of those local COREs.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Our last question comes from Andrea. Your line is open.
Thank you so much. I am calling from the state of Texas, and I am actually suggesting a change for the regular FMLA forms. I have been running into more and more, healthcare providers are refusing to complete the forms because they somehow think they will be violating HIPAA. And so they, unless there's a authorization for release of information, they will not complete the forms. Is there anywhere on there where maybe WHD can indicate this is not a violation of HIPAA, or maybe just add a signature line where the employee can authorize the release for the doctor to complete the FMLA forms?
That's a great point. I myself specifically, I'm not aware of if that's a capability. We will certainly take that back to our forms folks and kind of run through that, because that's a great question. I don't know. One of our forms. Yeah, that's one we'd have to follow up on, but that's a great point, and I don't know if that's something they've discussed in the past with these things. Again, they're voluntary forms, but yeah, your question's valid, and I don't know the answer to. I'll have to follow up on that.
And it might be something that can even fall under the training for that group, for the healthcare providers. I really think they're confusing the two laws. But maybe the new format of the forms will kind of help, because it doesn't so much go into the medical diagnosis and symptoms, et cetera. However, I'm still getting a lot of doctors are refusing to do it without that authorization of release.
Gotcha. That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Thank you. And at this time, we have no further questions on the audio line.
Okay. So we'll go back over here to the chat. I did see one question. Are wage and hour investigators still including FCRA compliance as a normal part of investigations? The answer is yes. In fact, we've the exact numbers escaping me, but we've done I want to say over 2,000 investigations into FCRA, complaints and issues. So that's definitely been a huge part of our work the last 4 or 5 months here since FCRA was enacted back in April 1st. So that is definitely something that we have, our investigators are exploring that. We've been sending out press releases that talk about the results of some of those when they, the cases have been closed. So we're definitely, pursuing FCRA compliance as part of our job. So that's definitely happening. Let's see here. So here's a question about an apprenticeship program. Where can I find compliance resources for this reporting? So this is interesting because we get this quite a bit. So our ETA is another agency within labor, the training administration. They're sort of the ones in charge of apprenticeships, but this also bleeds into our area in terms of, how apprenticeships get paid and sort of the wages and stuff behind that. So there's a lot of materials. The ETA website on DOL has a lot of materials around the apprenticeship programs and how they work and that. And we do cover some of that with our wage materials online on our dol.gov/WHD page as well. So there's a lot of materials up online about the apprenticeship, but certainly ETA is sort of our the agency within labor that handles the real apprenticeship information. Let's see. Here's another good one that somebody asked. Are there guidelines for reentry or return to work as employees are slowly returning back to the office? It's certainly something I think we're all facing with this pandemic. And we've got a big chunk of our questions and answers on our, what we call our pandemic page, our dol.gov/wage and hour, WHD/FFCRA. We've got a number of Q&As that cover this whole idea of return to work, return to school, if you want to call it return to the new normal or whatever you want to call it. We've got a lot of materials a lot of questions and answers that touch on this. And a lot of it is tough because it's all brand new. It's a very unprecedented situation. But, we mentioned earlier the idea of like continuous versus intermittent leave. When it comes to, paid leave, there's issues around school openings and closures. Back when all this first happened and there were a lot of layoffs, there's some guidance about like how layoffs may affect, what people may be owed in terms of paid leave. So there's a lot of questions and answers up on that pandemic website, that DOL.gov/WHD/FFCRA. There's a lot of materials up there that speak to this topic. And this is something that as an agency we're constantly talking about. A lot of our big press releases, our national press releases talk about new products that we're putting out that help answer newer questions. Early in the summer we put out some information about, a lot, myself included, my kids go to camps during the summer to get them out of our hair. Well, a lot of camps were canceled. So what does that mean in terms of using leave or how that worked? And then now kids are going back to school, but they're doing it virtually. And what does that mean for particular results? So there's a lot of materials up there that speak to some of these scenarios. Again, though, with a very specific scenario, it's always best to call into that 866-4-US-WAGE number to help really walk through what applies to you and your business or as an employee. So we encourage you to do that. Operator, any more audio questions?
At this time, we have no other questions on the audio line.
Okay, let's track through a few more of these chats. There's a question about how often is the Davis-Bacon wages reviewed? Has anything changed in the COVID-19 guidelines? Is there a training covering the Davis-Bacon wages coming up? So yeah, so the Davis-Bacon Act is one of our big acts that we always it's always kind of on our radar, enforcement of that act. And there are certainly implications for the new world we're all living in. And we do have materials that talk to that. And again, we've got our local core folks who can help give trainings to local employers and really cover specifics like that act as well. I'm sorry, I'm just kind of multitasking a bit here. Okay, let me look here. You see there's another chat with a second to the idea of information about private versus public information or guidance, on that dividing line. So somebody brought up opinion letters, and for those of you who are familiar with those, there's, 65 opinion letters up on our website that speak to, again, kind of more specific situations, but there's a growing body, sort of a body of work there that helps parse out some situational stuff in the wage and hour world. And you can search through those. We have a little web tool where you can kind of do a little search on those, and it goes back, I think, 2 or 3 years now. So those opinion letters are just one more form of guidance that's available on our website. We call them a million different things, but it's the opinion letters. They're usually around sort of like court cases type things and other situations that come up from that. And again, there's a whole batch of them, like 65 of them up there and growing. So that's another resource folks can check out to see if maybe there's a scenario in there that would address their situation. All right. Somebody had a question about compliance videos. So DOL has its own YouTube channel. I think it's literally youtube.com/USDOL, I think. But you can just search for Department of Labor on YouTube, and there's literally hundreds of videos all across labor. I mean, labor has, I think it's 26 some agencies underneath the Department of Labor umbrella, and there are just tons and tons of videos. And Wage and Hour, we've got our own, what they call a playlist, which has all our, our PSAs, our public service announcements. It's got our FICRA-related videos that have just gone up. It's got videos around FMLA, FLSA. So all of our videos are on the YouTube DOL channel, which you can just search through that. Of course, you can go to our website, but it just links over to our DOL playlist. So all of our videos are on there, and they're closed captioned, so they're friendly for hard of hearing folks.